All right, so I'll be recording the call for people who are unable to join. Um, okay. So, like I said, tonight I would basically want to introduce the concept of SQL to you. But before that, let me just basically tell you what a data analyst does. So, if you attended Monday's class, I gave a little bit of explanation about what is required of a data analyst. So, as a data analyst in a company, what is required of you is to get the data that the company has gathered, and then analyze this data, then get some insights from the data that you've analyzed and use these insights to make informed business decisions. So you're going to communicate this insights with the stakeholders. That's most likely your manager, the CEO, people who have stakes in the business, and then these people will take the insight that you've provided to them and then use this insight to make informed business decisions. And then I gave a couple of examples on Monday. Um, but let me just reiterate today so that for those of you that are joining us newly, you can understand where I'm coming from. So I hope that you can see my screen. So I have a dummy data here. This data basically just, so for instance, let's just say it's data for that I gathered from student, that is you guys who joined this call. So let's say maybe when you're about to join the call, you asked to, input your username, your first name, last name, your gender, your password, and maybe the status online or offline. So this is the data that I gathered from you guys. It is not actually, but I'm just saying, let's assume it is, right? So there are 1,000 students on the call, right? So I need to analyze the data. The data doesn't give much information, but I just want to use this to explain the concept of data analytics to you for those of you that were not around on Monday. So as a data analyst, let's say I work for a company, the company that teaches maybe data analytics, and I'm the data analyst in the company. So the company gathers the data. The very first step in any data analytics process is to gather the data. Before you can analyze data, you have to have data. So this is the data that the company has gathered. Maybe they gathered it automatically from the website when students try to sign up and they input their first name, last name. Those data come here to me as a data analyst. That's one way of gathering data. There are a couple of ways to gather data. It can be from the website. You can get data from the internet. You can get data from an interview. You can get it from just observing. So there are a couple of ways to gather data. But the very first step as a data analyst or in the data analytics process is to gather your data, because you need data in order to be able to analyze. Now, after you've gathered your data, there is another step you need to take, and it's called cleaning. You need to clean your data. So what does clean data mean? Clean data means data that is consistent, correct, um, complete. So for instance, let's say when you were filling the form, for instance, when you're about to join this call, you were filling a form and then they ask for your name, your surname, and then they ask for your gender. And someone, instead of imputing that gender as male, mistakenly spelled it as male, right? Let's say maybe the person is from Anambra or something. No offense. But anyways, they imputed their name as male, right? If I, the data analyst, I'm about to analyze this data, right? And maybe my manager asks me, so what is the ratio or what is the percentage of male to female that we have in our class, right? Do we have more female than we have male, or do we have more male than we have female? Let's now say I analyze this data and maybe I wrote a code, or maybe I did something that counts how many males we have and how many females we have. And there are a couple of people who have spelled male wrongly. Maybe they spelled it this way. Male, I might have more males than females in the class, but because of this inconsistency or this incorrect information, my analysis is going to be wrong. So if at the end of the day, I end up analyzing this data, I'm going to say that I have more female than male because some of these um, words were spelled incorrectly, and because they were spelled incorrectly, they do not count for males. So this is an example of an unclean data. When data is unclean, that means incorrect, inconsistent, missing. When data is unclean, the analysis is usually wrong. So if you clean data, if you analyze data that is not clean, your analysis is most likely going to be incorrect. So your data needs to be clean before you analyze it. That is why cleaning data is the second step in the data analytics process. Are you following, please? Do you understand? All right. So after you've gathered the data as a data analyst, most times you would not be tasked with gathering the data if you work as a data analyst in a company. Data is already gathered, or there are people in charge of making sure the data is readily available for you. People like data engineer. So a data engineer's role in a company is to make sure that there's data readily available for the data analyst or the data scientist to analyze. So the first phase of gathering data might not be up to you. The data might be there, but you might still need to fetch the data, which I would show you today. Then the second phase is to clean the data. That means make it consistent. For instance, changing male to male so that it is consistent, or any incorrect spelling, any missing value. For instance, let's say there was a column that was called age, and then someone's age is 600. You know that that is most likely a mistake, and maybe the person meant to write 60. So if you left it at 600, right, and maybe you want to find the average age of your students, the 600 is going to make it incorrect. So if you don't clean it and then maybe change it to 60, the result of your analysis is going to be incorrect. That's why cleaning data is like the second phase of your data analytics process. Now, after you've cleaned the data, the next phase is to analyze the data, analyze and visualize. So a lot of studies has been done, and then people have realized that the best way to communicate your insights after you've analyze your data is to visualize it. So for instance, let's say my manager asks me, um, how many, what's the percentage of male to female, or how many male do we have and how many female do we have? And then I'm trying to like maybe analyze this data. So don't worry about what I'm doing, just follow along with the explanation. So maybe I try to analyze this, and then I go and then I show him that, oh, we have 503 female students and 497 male students. But as a data analyst, it is not advisable that I convey the insights of my analysis to the stakeholders in form of numbers like this. Most times it is usually advisable that you use a visual or a chart or a graph. So this paints a better picture. This paints a better picture than just those numbers that were there. So if I show this to my manager, he might understand it better than just showing him this. So you can see that 49% of my students are male, while 50.3% of the students are female. So we have more female than male, or maybe I could even use a different kind of chart to show him that, you see, we have more female than male. So basically what I'm saying is the third process in your data analytics, third steps in your data analytics process is analyzing and visualizing your data. And it is usually advisable to visualize your data instead of just presenting raw facts and figures. So those are the steps. Gathering your data, that is getting data you need to analyze. The second step is cleaning it, making sure it's suitable for analysis. And then the third step is analyzing and then visualizing your data. Do you understand so far? So that's basically all there is to data analytics. I mean, it can be way more complex than this, but this is the entire scope or premise of data analytics. That is what you would be expected to do if you work as a data analyst in a company. Get your data, clean it, analyze it, then present your findings. This is an example of a finding. It will be way more complex because there are a lot of different things you'll be analyzing at once. But this is just an example of finding. You now present this to maybe your manager and show them that, oh, we have more female than males in our cohort. We have in the number of students we have. So that is the entire premise of data analytics. It's a lot of work, but once you understand the scope, then you know what to learn for, right? So firstly, as a data analyst, the very first tool you would need is a spreadsheet tool. So this tool I'm using here, this where I've been doing all of these things, this is a spreadsheet tool. This is called Google Sheets. There are a couple of spreadsheet tools in the market. This is called Sheets and it's from Google. But the most popular one is Excel. Excel is from Microsoft, but they're called spreadsheet tools. That's like the major tool you need to learn as a data analyst. So a spreadsheet tool is used to store data. As you can see, I use it to store this data, which is the names of my students, their genders, their passwords, and so on. It's used to store data. It's used to clean data or manipulate data. As you can see, I use this spreadsheet tool to change mail to mail. So it's used to manipulate or clean data. It's used to store data. It's used for calculations. You can do a lot of complex calculations in a spreadsheet. It is used to visualize data, like I just did. It was this spreadsheet tool I used to create this chart. So it is used to visualize data. It is used to analyze data, like I did. I found how many female we have and how many male we have in the number of students. That's a simple example of analysis. So a spreadsheet tool basically does everything: to gather your data, to store your data, to clean, manipulate, visualize, analyze. Anything you want to do, a spreadsheet tool does it. And it's like the first tool you need to learn as a data analyst. You could learn Microsoft Excel, you could learn Google Sheets, you could learn Apple numbers, but they build on the same concept. So if you learn Google Sheets, you'll be able to use Microsoft Excel. Although there are a couple of differences, but the knowledge of on one will come in handy when you're learning the other one. So as a data analyst, that's the very first tool you need to learn. Peter says he can't see anything. Can you guys still see my screen? Okay, so Peter, maybe try to refresh the page. You should be able to see it. So the very first tool you need to learn as a data analyst is a spreadsheet tool. So it could be Microsoft Excel or Google Sheets. Those are the two most popular ones. Yeah, but then there are a couple of limitations when you're working with spreadsheet tools. In fact, they are not made to handle big data. Because this data is small, so everything goes smoothly. I just have about 1,000 rows. I'm not touching on rows yet, but I just have 1,000 students. That is why you see it works smoothly. But there are companies that gather a lot of data. So let's say companies that have, like, let me not use students in this instance. Let me say maybe I worked in a company that sells stuff. So maybe um, the company sells a product. Maybe they gather the product that was sold, the quantity, maybe the unit price, maybe the price, and maybe let's say location, right? And then let's say the first product that was sold was a laptop, so and then the unit price was 200, and then this is 400, and then the location is, let's say, Lagos. Let me just fill in like 3 rows. And then let's say airports, 5, 120. 600, I believe. Let's say Johannesburg. And finally, let's say a mouse. And the mouse is okay quantity. Let's say 8. And person got like 50. So that's 400. Let's say Accra. Right. So let's say I work for a company that sells products like this, maybe a supermarket. Maybe an online market. And they could have more than 1,000 orders. Maybe in a day, let's say a company like Amazon or something, they could have like 1 million orders. So that is where spreadsheets have issues. Spreadsheets are not built to handle like really large data. So they try, Excel can take about 1 million rows. And then when you start including things like Power Pivots, can take more rows. Google Sheets can also take about 5 million rows. But the truth is, when you have about 500,000 or even 600,000 records in a spreadsheet, it starts to hang. It doesn't work properly anymore because they are not built for this. They're just built for light data. Maybe you have 200,000, 300,000 records that you need to analyze or store, and it works perfectly. But when you have really large data, especially for big companies, the spreadsheet starts to mess up. So spreadsheets are not really built to store large data. So that is where a database comes in. Now, a database is just like a spreadsheet, right? But it stores data in large quantity, right? So a database, I don't want to go into much details about structured and unstructured data, but there's something called structured data. This is an example of structured data, a data that is arranged structurally, that has a structure. So for instance, you can see the vertical spaces here, all the quantity are in one space, and then there are also horizontal spaces. They are just structured. This is an example of structured data. Another example could be, let's say, let's go to Wikipedia, right? So this is data, as you can see, but you can see it's not structured. It just exists freely. So this is an example of unstructured data. So data can be structured in form of a table like this, or data can be unstructured in form of an email or a picture or a video. So this is unstructured. This is structured here because it is in form of a table. This is unstructured also. So a database can store both structured and unstructured data, but structured data are way more popular than unstructured data. So let's just focus on the structured data for now. So a database stores structured data just like a spreadsheet, but the difference is that a database can store any size of data. If you have 1 million records, 10 million, 100 million records, it will store it and it will still work fine. Or like a spreadsheet that when you start having 500,000 records, it starts to hang. Sometimes it crashes and then it becomes really slow. But as it has its advantages, it also has its disadvantages. So what I mean by that is, so I just gave, this is an example of a database, right? Just don't worry about all the complexities. But just the same way spreadsheets, there are different renditions from different companies. For instance, this is Sheets. The name of this spreadsheet is called Sheets, and it's from Google. Google created this. There's also another spreadsheet called Excel, which is from Microsoft. There's also another spreadsheet called Numbers, which is from Apple. That's the same way a database management system can be from different companies. So I'm sure you must have heard things like MySQL or PostgreSQL or Microsoft SQL Server or Oracle. Those are all database management systems, but they are from different companies, right? So just follow along with the explanation. This is my data here in a spreadsheet. You can see how it looks. And this is this same data in a database. Remember, I told you a database has a little bit of similarities with a spreadsheet because it stores data, both structured and unstructured, but then it can store larger number of data than spreadsheet, but they also have their own limitations. Now, this is this data in a database. So let's say this is a database. This is a database rendition, but let's just say this is a database and this is a spreadsheet. The major difference between a spreadsheet and a database is that in a spreadsheet, for you to work with data in a spreadsheet, for instance, if I wanted to analyze it or if I wanted to edit it. So let's say, for instance, we realize that this person's name was not David and it was Davido. If I wanted to edit this David and change it to Davido, all I need to do is just double click and add O and then click enter, and the name has been changed to Davido in a spreadsheet. But in a database, it doesn't work that way. I can't just double click on David and then add O and then it will work. For you to interact with data in a spreadsheet, or for you to work with data in a database, rather, there's a database. For you to interact with data in a database, you need to write something called SQL or SQL. So SQL or SQL means structured query language. Basically, what that means is that that is the only language that a database understands. It doesn't understand anything else. You can't just double click or right click or just change. You need to write SQL. SQL is the only language that a database understands. So if I wanted to delete a row here, for instance, let's say I wanted to delete this Paul 85 Maurice Miller, I just needed to come here, right click, and then go to delete row, and then it has deleted that Paul row. But in a database, if I need to delete that Paul 85 Maurice Miller, I can't just come here, right click and delete. I need to write code. And that code that the database understands is called SQL, because this is a language that you write for a database to understand. Is it clear? Do you understand the explanation before I give examples? So in a database, you don't just click and edit and do things you want to do. You have to actually write code for the database to understand. So for instance, if I wanted to change this David to Davido in a spreadsheet, remember I just needed to like double click on it and put O. But in a database, I needed to write something like maybe update this table called students table and set the first name as Davido, where user ID equals 1. Um, okay, set, not select. Set the first name as the Davido, single quotes, not double quotes. So I would explain this, what is happening later. Okay, so now you see it has changed to Davido, as you can see. So if I wanted to change David to Davido in a spreadsheet, I just needed to double click and add the O. But in the database, I needed to write this code in order to interact with this table. I can't just double click, because this code, everything I wrote here is called SQL, because this is the language that a database or a relational database understands, SQL. So you need to learn SQL if you want to work with data in a database. And the truth is, it is compulsory. Why is it compulsory? Because if you work in a small company, they don't have a lot of data, so they just save their data in Excel. So you don't need to learn SQL. But if you work for a standard company, all their data lives in a database. So if their data lives in a database, there's no way you're going to interact with this data in a database or do anything or analyze it or clean it or anything you want to do if you don't understand SQL. Because SQL is the language that you use to communicate with a database. Is it clear, please? Do you understand? Okay. No, so I'll just write like maybe 4 or 5 basic SQL codes for you so that you can just have a glimpse of what it means. But then just know that it is almost compulsory to learn SQL. I mean, there are a lot of data analysts who work without writing any SQL code because maybe they work in small companies that all they do is in Excel. They don't have a database. But once you work in a standard company and they have a database, you need to learn SQL. In fact, not just data analysts use SQL, data scientists also use SQL, data engineers also use SQL. Because as long as there's data in the team, that means data lives in a database, and that means you need to learn SQL. That is why it is necessary that you learn it. Any link on where to learn SQL? Well, thank you for your question. So the whole essence of this bootcamp, I don't know if you saw the pinned message. I pinned the message. I don't know. Yeah. So the whole essence of this bootcamp is an introduction to the data analytics class that is starting soon, right? So in the data analytics class, um, so we'll be teaching Excel, as you can see, touch on all you need to know about Excel, touch on SQL, as you can see, touch on Power BI and Tableau, then touch on Python, and then we'll give you 5 projects, and then we'll build a portfolio website, and then you put the projects in the website, and then you start applying for jobs. So this is the entire essence of these 3 classes to prepare you for the upcoming bootcamp. So you can use this link in the pinned message to check out the bootcamp after the class. But yes, you can learn SQL with us. No, it's not for free. So the bootcamp is $100, but if you're joining from Nigeria, there's a discount, so you only pay 50,000 naira. But you're joining outside Nigeria, then it's $100. Okay, so let me proceed. Now, before you can even see data in a database, normally when you open a database, let me see. Let me just do something. Okay. So when you open a database, right, you don't see any data. You just see the different tables that you have. For instance, this student table is the same with this student table here. So this student table has some columns. I know I've not explained columns and all these things. So these are things we learned during the bootcamp. But then there's a username column, there's a first name, there's a last name column, there's a gender column, password column, status column. That's the same thing you see in this database: username, first name, last name. But you only see the column names. You won't see the real data like this in a database. But for you to see this real data in a database, you need to write code, even to see the data. You know, in a spreadsheet, you just see it. This is the data, you can just see it. But in a database, to see any data, you need to write SQL code. So the very first code you need to learn in SQL is called the select command. So select is going to tell you, you're telling the computer what you want to see, which of these columns you want to see: user ID, username, first name, last name. So you're supposed to list out all the columns you want to see. For instance, user ID, comma, first name, comma, last name, comma, and so on. But if there are a lot of columns, you can't, it's not logical to list them out. So you can use asterisk. Asterisk means select all the columns. So we want to see this table here. But I told you in a database, you can't just see the table. You have to write SQL to see the table. So we are going to say select all the columns instead of listing out all the columns. And all the columns is denoted by this asterisk sign. So we're going to say select all the columns from where? From the name of this table. This table is called students. From students. So select all the columns from students. And then when you come here and click run, it will now show you the table. You can see the table has been displayed. So to see a table in a database, even to just see it, you need to write code to see the table. And these are the two basic commands you need to learn to see any table. Select the columns you want to see from which table you want to see it from. So because we wanted to see all the columns, we said select asterisk from the students table. That is why it showed us the entire table, as you can see. Are you following? Is that clear, please? Do you understand? All right. So it's also possible that you didn't want to see all the columns. Maybe you wanted to see only the first name and the last name column. Instead of saying select asterisk, you could have said select first name, comma, always separate the columns with a comma, last name from the student table. So basically we're telling it to only show us the first name and the last name column. That is this column and this column. We don't want to see all the columns. So if we run this, we can see that it shows us only the first name and then the last name column. So what you specify in your select command is the columns you would like to see. And what you specify in your from command is the table you would like to see these columns from. So because we wanted to see only first name and last name, that's why we said select only first name, comma, last name from the students column. Now I want to go back to seeing the entire table. We just need to change this to asterisk. Select asterisk and then we run it. And then it shows us all the columns. So this is how you view any table in your database. Remember, if you work in a real company, they will have multiple tables. They might have 100 tables, 200 tables. But for you to view any of those tables, you have to write these two basic commands where you want to view the columns you want to see and which table you want to see it from. Which database are you currently using? Okay, SQL. So SQL or SQL is not a database, right? I explained this. SQL is this code I'm writing. It is the language that you use to communicate with a database. However, there's something called a database management system. For instance, this table, for you to be able to see this table here, you have to open this table or this file in a spreadsheet. An example of a spreadsheet is Google Sheets or Microsoft Excel. That's the same way for you to interact with a database. You need a database management system, and there are different database management systems from different companies. There's MySQL, there is PostgreSQL, there is SQL Server from Microsoft, there is Oracle. So there are different database management systems, but SQL is not a database. SQL is the language, is this code you're writing. So if you learn this SQL code, you can use it in any database management system. So if you take this select asterisk from students and then you take it to PostgreSQL or Microsoft SQL Server or MySQL, it will still work because SQL is universal, right? So SQL is universal. So if you learn SQL, you can use it in any database management system, whether it's PostgreSQL, whether it's MySQL, whether it's Oracle, whether it's Microsoft SQL Server. As long as you learn SQL, SQL is universal. And to answer your question, this is called SQLite. SQLite is a different RDBMS or a database management system, but it's used online. That is why I just used this. I didn't want to stick to one particular one. That's why I used this one online. But this SQL we are learning, if you have Postgre on your laptop or you have MySQL, or you have Microsoft SQL, and you run this code, it will still also work. So I hope that answers your question. SQL is just the language, it's not a database. Okay. So yeah. Now let me teach you one other code. Now let's say I wanted to see. Yeah, Chino, so you can speak. You raised your hand. Which will you recommend? So it's not about I won't recommend anyone. You know why? Because if you're learning, it really doesn't matter which one you use, right? But once you learn SQL, learning SQL is the major thing. It doesn't matter which database management system you use. What matters is that you've learned SQL, because when you start working in the company, you're not going to decide, oh, I'm going to use this. It's what the company uses that you're going to use. But once you understand SQL, then definitely you'll be able to use it. There might be minor differences between these different DBMs, very minor, just the same way there are minor differences between Google Sheets and Microsoft Excel. But if you understand the SQL language, you'd be able to work on anyone. Carlo, do you have a question? Your hand is raised.
Yeah, good day.
Yeah, good day.
Sorry, I want to ask, can one get data from any database directly, or you have to upload your own data before you can retrieve any data from it?
Okay, so I stated earlier at the beginning of the call that the data in the database, you might not be responsible for getting the data there. So there are lots of ways to populate or to get data in a database. Sometimes data automatically goes from a website to a database. So for instance, when you are registering for this call and then it asks for your name, your first name, your last name, all these details you filled, sometimes it will just go directly into the database of the company. So there are a lot of methods that a data engineer or a database administrator takes to ensure that data comes into the database. So you're not tasked in to manually impute the data into the database. Data comes from there, from websites, from APIs, from the cloud, from multiple places, from forms. And sometimes you might need to impute data yourself into a database. But yeah, as a data analyst, most times when if it's a big company, there's a data engineer and there's a database administrator, you might not be bothered on how to get data into the database. All you would do as a data analyst is to come to this database, fetch the data you want, export it, take it out, and maybe take it to maybe Excel or Power BI to analyze and visualize. All database is just to store data majorly. So what you need to do as a data analyst is go to database, fetch the data you want, and take it to any other tool you need to analyze your data or to visualize it or to present it or whatever. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. So let me just teach you one more command in SQL, and we'll call it a day. So you see, this is data. We've selected all the columns from the student table. We have both male, female. So let's say we wanted to filter it. We wanted to see only our male students. We don't want to see male, female, and we just want to see only. Maybe my manager came to me and said, "Oh, Gabriel, please give me a list of all the male students we have." I don't know why he wants that. Maybe he wants to maybe run a campaign for males, or let's say all the female students. Maybe he wants to give scholarship to, women have a lot of scholarship in data these days. So if I wanted to filter this data to show me only female students, there is another command I could add. The select command is to find the columns. Then the from command is the table where I want to select data from. Then you can also add another command, where. So the where command is used to filter the data. So I want to filter it to only female, where gender is female. I don't want to see male student. So I only want where the gender. Show me this table where the gender is female. So I'll say where gender equals female. So if I run this, I can see that my table has been filtered. Now I only have students that are female. You see, there is no male there. All the students here are females. So this is just basic SQL command. So now that I've gotten only female students, I can now import this in form of a table, like maybe like an Excel table like this. So maybe let me export it. Let me just show you. So I can now export this and then take it to maybe a spreadsheet like Excel like this. Don't worry about all I'm doing. You learn all of these things during the boot camp. Well, I just follow. Is this it? So I can just export it. So you see, I've exported it, and this is the data here. And these are only my female students. You can see there's no male here. I can now submit this to my manager and say this is a list of all the female students we have. So in SQL, you can use the where command to add a filter. So I filtered it where the gender is female. If I wanted to see only male students, I can say where gender is male. And then when I run this, you see, it shows me only the male students. So I've shown you three different commands in SQL now. Select is selecting the columns you want to see. So let's say I didn't want to see all the columns. I could have said, show me the first name column, the last name column, and maybe the gender column. These are the only three columns I want to see. So these are the only three columns I want to see: first name, last name, from this student's table, but only show me where the gender is male. I don't want to see females. So if I run this, I can see those three columns: first name, last name, and gender, where the gender is male. Are you following? Do you understand, please? So there are a lot of commands in SQL. There are commands to filter, commands to sort, commands to aggregate, commands to analyze, commands to clean, commands to edit data like I did earlier. Remember, this was the command I used to edit David and change it to Davido. So there are commands to edit data, there are commands to delete data, there are commands to add new tables, there are commands to add new rows. But anything you want to do in a database, you need to learn SQL. So all these things I'm writing is called SQL. And this is the code you use to interact with a database. I hope it's clear. Now, SQL can be very complex. I mean, it's easy to learn starting out, but then there are a lot of advanced SQL terms when you start learning. But it's universal, right? And then it's needed in virtually every data field as long as there's data in a database. So either you're a data analyst or a data scientist or a data engineer or a database administrator, you need SQL. Yeah, so this is just a brief introduction to SQL. Like I said, during the boot camp, we're touching it in details. In fact, there's an entire week dedicated to SQL. Where is it? So you learn about RDBMSs, databases, data types, the select clause, the from, the where clause. We've shown you these three: the group by clause, the order by clause. Then there's something called subqueries, Then there's joins, there's unions. You show how to create table, how to create databases, how to insert data, update data, primary key, foreign key, entity relationship diagram. So basically, we'll treat SQL in details. But this is just an introduction, just to let you know what we have in store for you. Um, so tomorrow, I'll show you visualization. Tomorrow is when I'll show you how to visualize data as a data analyst, because remember I told you that when you've analyzed your data and you want to present your findings to your stakeholders, you do not present it in form of numbers. The best way to present your findings is in form of visuals. So you use things like charts, graphs, all of these things to present your findings. Sometimes you create a dashboard as a data analyst. Your task will be to create dashboards and reports and things like that. So you'll be creating things like this, as you can see, be presenting them to your stakeholders, because this is like where they just have like a brief overview of what the business does. So someone can come and see that our total revenue is 992 k dollars. The total users we have is 1.4 million. This is where our traffic come from. Most of our traffic is from organic search. Some of them are from direct, some of them are from paid adverts. So this is an example of a dashboard, and this is an examples of what is required of you as a data analyst. All these are gotten from data that's been analyzed, and then you present it in form of visuals, charts, and graphs, because this paints a better picture than just using numbers. So tomorrow I'll be showing you how to visualize data as a data analyst. And finally on Friday, I'll show you the programming parts where you use Python to analyze your data. Tomorrow, same time, same link. Okay, let's do same time, same link. I'll still post on Twitter also, but yeah, we can do same time, same link, 5 p.m. The same link tomorrow about visualization. So yeah, I'll take the next 2-3 minutes to take questions. So if you have any questions, please ask before we call it a night. The calendar link here. This is the link. Okay, you mean the calendar link? How do I get the calendar link? Calendar. Let me see if I can get it here. Uh, see. No, this is a new one. Sorry. Intro to SQL. Okay. Why is this taking so long? Let me see if there are other questions for tomorrow. Thanks so much. I'm glad you gained a lot. This link is taking so long to. Okay, so this is the calendar link. It should be the same time tomorrow. Larry, your hand is raised. You can ask your question.
Okay, good evening. Hi,
Good
Gilbert,
evening.
can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, great. In the link you shared the other time, you post there's a link to YouTube where we install SQL Server Batch and Shell, right? I
Okay.
believe during the course of this training, we are going to be making use of it, right?
Yes. So you'd install the tools like at the beginning of the training. Yes, if that's what you're asking.
Okay. Now, my question now is this: the SQL Server we install, or is SQL Server in that category a database, right?
Yes, it's the database management system.
Okay. Thank you. That's want to clarify.
Yes, SQL Server, MySQL, PostgreSQL, Oracle, SQLite, they're all database management systems. Yes. How do we create a database? In the same way, by writing SQL code, that is left for the bootcamp, but it's basically the same way. You just write code like, where's that place? Create database, set this as this. Let me see if I can just show you. Let me see, where is that? Um, I'm not sure I can find it. Let me see. Okay, so this is how you create a database. This is just the code I'm just showing you. So this is for creating table. You'd have created the database already. It's basically the same code. Create a database. You give the name of database. Then start creating each table manually. Create this table called user detail. Then these are the different columns in the table, and these are the different data types, and these are the different, whether they are null or not null. Then you start inserting values into it. This is if you are going to actually be creating the database manually. So you start inserting values into it, but basically it's still SQL. And these are the codes to create database, create tables, and insert values into a table. But yeah, we'll be treating on that during the bootcamp. Are there any questions, any other questions before we end the class? So the pin message contains the link to the bootcamp. Let me just paste it again. You can go through the curriculum and see if it's something you'd be interested in. But yeah, so if there are no other questions, I would see you guys same time tomorrow. Okay, Izzy, you have a question. Please, you can speak. Izzy Chisom Mirabel.
Good, good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Good
Please,
evening. Go
how
ahead.
much is the boot camp registration?
So if you're joining outside Nigeria, is
Hello?
$100, but if you're joining from Nigeria, it's 50,000 naira.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. You guys just ask your question. Simon Mutai, just ask your question. You don't need to raise up your hand. Time is up.
Good evening.
Good evening.
In case of 200,000 entries, how do you enter it manually?
So that's a good question, actually. You rarely ever enter data manually. So when you start a business, so let me explain to you. When you start a business, you have to plan out the data architecture. So a data engineer is like the very first person you have to employ in your data team. A data engineer is going to be responsible for ensuring or just designing how data comes into the database. If you start out a business and then you've not really employed a data engineer, you just start the business 1 2 years 3 years, and maybe all your data is on a sheet of paper, someone might manually have to start copying that data from a sheet of paper to a database or to a computer system one by one. But if you started out your data architecture with a data engineer, you just create systems and pipeline on how the data is going to populate the database. So for instance, maybe those data from directly from a website to go into the database, or from a form, or maybe they write a Python script that just fetches the data straight to the database. But if you've not done that before, and maybe you have the data sitting somewhere, then the easiest way is to write a Python script. So a Python script will take each line of those data and then populate it into the database. There are a couple of ways. Unless the data is now on a piece of paper, maybe it's a physical data, then you need a data entry person to like manually copy that data from a piece of paper into a table. But these days, there's software. For instance, Excel these days can take in a picture. You can snap the data on a piece of paper, and Excel will just, with its AI, just transfer that picture into a real table. It will make some errors, but then you sort it out. So I hope that answers your question, Simon.
Yes, thank you.
Do you have data science bootcamp or Python standalone with someone who is okay? Yeah, yes. So so there's a data analysis bootcamp. In fact, data analysis bootcamp also has beginner and advanced, but advanced is for people who, already have training in data analytics. There is a data science bootcamp. There is a data engineering bootcamp. There's a cloud computing bootcamp, and we also have tools bootcamp. So if you're interested in just the tools alone, if you don't want to take like a career bootcamp, you can just learn SQL from beginning to end. You can learn Power BI, Tableau, Python, R, Excel, Google Sheets, and the rest. So there is a Python bootcamp if you just want to learn Python. Maybe you know all the other tools. So this will teach you data structures, lists, sets, pandas, libraries, data manipulation, data visualization, web scraping, loops, functions, conditionals, just from beginner to advanced, right? So there are individual boot camps if you also want. There are career boot camps, and then there are tools boot camps. So anything data, we have it. Yeah, are there any other questions, please? All right, so thank you guys for attending, and then I'll see you tomorrow. Have a lovely evening. Bye. So the recordings of the meeting will be available. I would most likely paste the link on Twitter. So if you follow Twitter, you should see it. All right, bye guys.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye.
Thank you.
Oh, I need to stop the recording first.